Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast with your host, Philip Eidson. Here, thought leaders share the trends, strategies, and tactics that you can use to elevate the role of procurement and your career.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Art of Procurement. So I hope that you're enjoying the shows that we've been putting out recently. I've really been thrilled with the quality of the guests on the show so far. We've been very lucky in being able to talk to a number of leaders in the procurement space to kind of understand their philosophies and where they see the future. Having said that, if you do know of anybody who you'd recommend for the show, then I would love to hear from you. You can just get in touch via the Art of Procurement website, and there's a little button on there you can press. It'll take you to a form where you can just fill in, and that comes straight to me. So I was fortunate to be introduced to Alex Short, today's guest, by Gerard Chick, who I interviewed very recently for the show. Gerard introduced Alex as a pioneer in the procurement space. When I talked to Alex the first time, I knew that Gerard was spot on. Alex is a passionate entrepreneur, and he's focused on elevating the role of procurement through facilitating stronger and deeper supplier relationships. As you will hear today, Alex shares a ton of actionable content around how you can start building win-win relationships with your key suppliers. Alex talks about how you can actually go and do it, the tactics and the actions you can take to really build strong collaborative relationships with suppliers. Before we do go into the show, I want to let you know that in a recent Art of Procurement Friday show, I gave an overview of a number of questions that you can ask yourself to determine the health and the longevity of your supplier engagements. I've now consolidated that show into a short report and a checklist where you can just view the 14 questions, and appropriately enough, it's called the 14 questions to ask to determine the longevity of your supplier engagement. If you would like to pick up a copy of the checklist, then it's available to download now by visiting artofprocurement.com/14 questions. That's artofprocurement.com/14 questions. Okay, well, let's go straight into the show. So hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Art of Procurement. So today's guest is Alex Short. Alex is co-founder of Old Street Labs, and Old Street Labs' main product, Vizibl. So Alex, welcome to the show.
Hi, welcome. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all, Alex. So when I was looking at your background before the show, and I have to mention this, I was really disappointed to see that you're a Chelsea season ticket holder.
I thought you might bring that up.
Yeah, what a way to empathise with your guest in the first 10 seconds, right?
I can guarantee the next time we play Bradford, we will be.
I'm just praying that you never play us again, so that never actually comes to fruition. One of the things I was really interested in when I was looking to your background was the fact that you hitchhiked Africa, and that's not something you hear of every day. So why did you want to do that?
I suppose I've always had a taste for travelling and getting myself out of the comfort zone, so to speak. I've always been intrigued about Africa and how they do things very differently, and how operations over there work very differently. And the bug for travelling meant that I could fly to Johannesburg and not have to get on an aeroplane until I got to sort of Somalia.
Right.
Which is there's a fair few miles to cover in between that. So the feeling was to get away from the real world and open up and broaden the horizons. Yeah,
it's certainly not a standard journey by any stretch of the imagination.
No, it's not. And the nearest and dearest of my family said that they would disown me if I did it. And expected me never to return. But no, it was a wonderful experience, and I love the African continent, the people, and everything to do with it. It really is incredible. And I learned a few things from it, especially supply chains. And if we're talking about procurement over there, right, getting things from A to B is not necessarily as easy as it is in Europe and America and places like that.
So going on a journey like that, do you think that it shaped your thinking in a way that led you to more entrepreneurial ventures rather than a more traditional career?
Not to steal away from Apple's line, think differently. It definitely helped me look at things differently. I think all life experiences and stuff we do is all about, changing our perspective, giving us a new view on something. So yeah, without a shadow of a doubt, Africa definitely taught me a few things. and has given me the question which I ask is why. I tend to work with my co-founder Mark Pereira, and a lot of the questions we always ask about procurement and the things we do is why are people doing it like that, and how can we make it easier?
Yeah, and you come from a tech background, if I'm not wrong, rather than a procurement background.
Yeah, so I've got a bit of technology background. I mean, I fell into procurement straight out of university. I think, like many people, procurement was sort of something that picked me out rather than me directly picking it out of university, and muddled my way through. I have a fascination for technology. One of the main reasons we've founded Old Street Labs and Vizibl is because of our. I suppose I've grown up on Facebook and Google and being able to order your groceries over the internet and so on and so forth. And having worked in a number of large corporates, it's been a real eye-opener to see the technology that we use in our everyday lives, and then the technology we use in our, I suppose, our work lives, and the gap between those. So that was the big driving force to sort of setting up Old Street Labs.
When you did, was it? It's been a couple of years, is it? Maybe 2 or 3 years since you set up Old Street Labs?
Yeah, so we started about 3 years ago, I think.
So did you set it up with the intent of building Vizibl, or was it more like a procurement business incubator, if you like, kind of figuring out what you wanted to do, what made sense, where there was a gap in the market, and Vizibl came as a part of that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. When we first kicked off, incubators were the big thing of the day, and hence why the name is Old Street Labs. But quite quickly with Mark Pereira, who's, I mentioned before, co-founder, he's been in the procurement space for about sort of 12, 13 years, and his network meant that quite quickly we could go and get in front of procurement people of varying responsibilities, or not, probably the wrong word, varying hierarchy within their business. So whether it was chief procurement officers or directors of supply chain or people in charge of SRM. And what we did, all the books said, is we got out the office and we went and spoke to these people, and we really tried to understand what their problems were, and really understand where procurement is heading and why they think that, and what areas of procurement can really be improved. And from there, we really bedded down to build Vizibl. So actually, we went from originally looking at the incubator to seeing what we think is a massive problem in this space, which is technology and supplier relationship management and the movement of procurement, I think, away from always being a cost driver to something more than that.
You mentioned that, you talked to a lot of folks in the space to try and gather your thoughts on what the future of procurement would look like. And if you have your crystal ball, what do you think procurement looks like? How far off are we?
For the crystal ball, I wish I had one. Well, I think that procurement's focus on cost management is always going to be there, something we'll never forget about. We're always going to have it as part of our job function. But I don't think it's going to always be the core focus. I think that there is an opportunity, and a huge one at that, for procurement to not only elevate themselves in the business, but also look to drive value from their key supplier relationships. We've got these fantastic suppliers that we've worked with for many, many years, and we're not actually extracting the value that could necessarily be taken from the table. Right. Okay, not with your entire your supplier base, but more with your strategic suppliers. There's one you work with on a day-to-day basis.
And I heard you talk before about us as professionals being spend entrepreneurs, and kind of the role that plays in driving the future of procurement. What do you mean by a spend entrepreneur?
Yeah, no, so good question. So it's actually a saying that I've taken from a recent book from McKinsey. I'll share that with you afterwards. Thanks. But it's that forever we've always been just hammering down on cost and dealing with other departments within the company and saying, no, the cost is too high. Well, actually, we need to work with other departments, and we need to become entrepreneurial and become agile and become flexible, and understand that if we work with our internal stakeholders as well as our external stakeholders on the supply side and obviously on our side, that taking more of an entrepreneurial and a more of a scattered approach, I suppose the word is, will mean that, okay, we might not get the best cost, but we might drive other values from it. So the other values could be new innovations, they could be new ways of working, they could be shared profit schemes, it could be, a wide handful of things.
Yeah, and that makes sense, because I think that as our role evolves, we talk a lot about wanting to be a business partner, not necessarily somebody who just has the hand on the till or the cash register.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it's exactly that. My belief is that procurement is going to move, and everyone's talking about it, towards a value focus.
Mm-hmm.
And what do I mean by that? And why do I think that's going to happen? Well, the first reason I think that's going to happen is because business models are being disrupted left, right, and center. You only have to look at Airbnb, HubSpot, all these other businesses within different spaces. The next reason is because there's a huge need for innovation for businesses to stay competitive. What if you could get 10 times value from your R&D by leveraging that from your supplier side? And then I think that there is a greater reliance on suppliers because of the need for agility. Consumers are more demanding than ever. Products need to get to market quicker. We need to get to new markets quicker. I think that whole agility is key. And being collaborative with your suppliers means that you can tick off these three main areas, which means that if procurement can manage these and be in charge of these, they will be the value focus, and in turn help them move themselves, back up to the top of the business and really get a seat at the table.
Yeah, and I think that it was a year or so now. You're kind of reminding me of an article that was in Harvard Business Review by Matthew Etow from Proxima, just talking about the importance of the supply base and how it's growing within companies, that something like 70% of a company's revenue now can be tied back to a third party in some way, shape or form. And, just kind of doing what we've done before isn't going to help the business get the most out of that. No,
I agree. And I've heard that the number's even higher than that. I mean, we're talking near 80%. So
no, it's kind of an imperative.
It really is, and there's other things which I find very interesting. I won't quote the stat because I'm not sure they would enjoy me putting it out there. But I was talking to a big pharma company recently, and they were talking about how they look at managing. Procurement's job is to manage up to the point of contract signature. So savings are made before the contract's saved, but then up to 75 to 80% of the value of the savings from the strategic sourcing can erode within 18 months.
Right.
And the reason behind that is because at point of contract, procurement's done its job and no one's really managing the contract afterwards.
Yeah, and it's very difficult to often then track those savings to the bottom line as well. So it's claimed, and I like to call it procurement math. We claim that we save a certain amount of money. Does that really ever impact the bottom line?
Exactly, spot on. And if we could really show that hitting the bottom line, and we can also go beyond just what our savings have shown and start driving that value, which is done through all sorts of different approaches, then procurement, as I say, seat at the top table will be warrant. And all I want for our function is for procurement to move forwards.
Yeah, and the topic really for today, and we kind of mentioned it a couple of times, was to discuss supplier relationships and supplier collaboration. And I think that's one of those topics that we like to throw around somewhat to demonstrate that we are more about value, that we talk that we want to get to, rather than just being about cost cutting. But then when you get under the surface, the reality is that it's just used as another tool to try and manage or beat up, for want of a better word, a supplier. It kind of, let me just step back. So before we go into the meat of the show, I'd really be interested to know what you define as supplier collaboration, what supplier collaboration means to you, and in your experience, why it's so important to our future.
Yeah, that's a good question. I've got sort of a whole load of stuff swimming around in my head now. So supplier collaboration, for me, is about the true collaboration between both the buyer and the supplier, and not just supplier, but business partners. So that could be vendors as well. Collaboration is about driving for a shared vision. It's about both you defining what is going to make the relationship successful and then heading down that roadmap together to really deliver it. I'm a big, and I might be jumping ahead of where we're going to talk, but I'm a big, what's the word? I hate the term, I suppose, is the thing to say, supplier relationship management.
Right. And that's something actually I wanted to ask, is that you taught when we connected before the show about the word being muddied, and it just doesn't mean what maybe the intent of it was to. So why do you think that is the case?
Yeah, so the first thing is SRM. Just the name itself, supplier relationship management, that is an action of buyers managing suppliers. That's not, in my opinion, a collaboration.
Yeah.
A true collaboration is both sides working together. So SRM just as a term has already got bad connotations around it. If I was to kick on from that, the next thing is that I think when SRM first came out, businesses used it much like a Trojan horse to beat up suppliers. It was another way of reducing cost rather than actually driving to this collaboration. And then I think the sort of third piece is that SRM wasn't thought through quite right, and not in the right way by people. It was very much a process orientated, and the bits of technology and the tools around it were Excel spreadsheets. They weren't really looking, in my opinion, at scalable approaches. And for SRM to work, we're a big believer, and hence our name. So a name drop here. I apologise, listeners.
No problem.
But it gave no real visibility. So SRM was all about tracking and looking at parts of the relationship, but it wasn't really giving the visibility to the supplier, and both the buyer and actionable visibility. So things that people could take off the back of it and really drive to what we call return on relationships and true collaboration. And there's lots of other words for it.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that, because when I think back to my experience, and I've worked in the supplier relationship management space, again, for the want of a better word, that's what we classed it or termed it in my company at the time. And we set out with all these intentions to build closer partnerships. And I think ultimately the end result was to manage cost rather than to look at anything more than that. And then we were surprised when we all kind of sat down and talked about how important our relationship was and the need to collaborate, but yet neither buyer or seller, me or the other side of the table, we never did. It was just the same old. And
yeah. So it's a really good point. And I can't tell you that naming names, but the amount of companies that we are working with and talking to, and we go in and we say, hey, show us your SRM strategy. And it really boils down to, right, we're going to take more cost out of the supplier. And you have to sort of reverse engineer it and say, hey, guys, look, you're not going to get the cost savings that you might do in the next 6 months, but within 18 months, you are going to see a real return on your relationships. You're going to see innovation. You're going to see new ways of working. You're going to have your suppliers coming to you with new approaches. And also you're going to be more reliant. It means you're going to be more agile. You're going to be more flexible. You can move into new markets. I mean, the possibilities are endless.
So when you talk about return on relationships, I think it's an emerging trend. So I've seen it in a couple of different places. You know, you kind of talked about what it meant to you and to Vizibl. How are you using that in your everyday kind of world in helping clients build better, stronger collaborative relationships?
Yeah, so we use return on relationships, and we try and see it as an actionable framework that really helps organizations drive tangible returns, and also that big piece of competitive advantage from their key supplier relationships. So what do we mean by that? Well, what we've done with a couple of the pharmaceutical companies are working at the moment, we've given them the framework to understand that there is more within the business around value chips that isn't just cost saving. So it's about trading other value chips with the wider business. And that comes from, defining positive behaviors, matching those positive behaviors back to the relationship and seeing where they end up in 6 months' time, a year's time.
And what would some of the examples of value chips be?
An example would be, well, if I was to give it a total example, an ability for, let's say, a pharma company to speed up their clinical research trials is a major competitive advantage. So what you might do is you might put the value chips down on between the buyer and the supplier. Right, if we can improve the speed of our clinical trials over 6 months by 2 weeks, then actually the value driven is far exceeding the £100,000 we might have saved, because we've got our clinical trial time period down by 2 weeks, which has actually in turn saved us £1 million in et cetera, et cetera. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think those are things that are kind of understood conceptually, but never really understood in terms of real numbers and what they mean to people. Once you do, you can start demonstrating an ROI that maybe we couldn't do in the past, which is why we always went for cost savings, because we could at least give out an ROI, whether that was realistic or not, that a finance organization, as an example, could value our worth on.
Yeah, really good point. And for us, and without, I'm sorry, I'm being a bit closed book, but without giving too much away, it is on that. We want to be able to help procurement go back to the business and say, hey, look, our cost savings aren't as much as they were, but these value checks showing that we've made improvements in efficiencies and all over different parts of the business. And return on relationships framework allows them to, I suppose, quantify that and feed it back into the finance and people that are asking procurement for returns and what they're doing.
So when you start thinking about where to focus return on relationships, or kind of a new SRM, for, again, want of a better phrase, to look at things differently with suppliers, are you looking at it on an initiative basis, or are you segmenting top suppliers and kind of trying to bring suppliers into a program on a one-by-one basis?
So another good question. So going quickly back to the SRM and why we used to think it had failed, my belief is that companies were trying to chew off doing supplier relationship management with too many suppliers. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is they were trying to take down a big segment of their suppliers, and they were trying to cascade the change management across the business, and there was too much change. The business didn't enjoy it. The change management didn't come in place. Individuals weren't conducive to it. So what we believe is, that everyone segments their suppliers to strategic all the way down. It's about taking your strategic suppliers and then running them through a process. But it's not about taking your top 200 strategic suppliers. We believe it's about then deciding on 10 of those suppliers that have all the right people around the relationships. You've got still some good integrity with the supplier on the other side, so they're going to want to get involved. They understand about the trust. They understand about building for the future. And the idea is once you've really, for a better word, once you've smashed it with those 10, you can use what we call a cookie cutter approach. And you can then, once you've done it with 10, you can then do it with the next 10 and the next 10 and the next 10. And what it does, it helps you build the case studies and the internal traction that people can really say, hey, let's work these 10 suppliers. Let's now get the wider business involved and do it with 10 more suppliers. And you just slowly grow it out rather than bringing in a massive initiative that people aren't really signed up to. Humans, we all hate change. Mm-hmm. So the easier you can make it and the more digestible you can make it, the better.
So you're finding, using 10 as an example, suppliers who are strategically important that are still, they have some level of relationship with you where there's a shared belief that in the concept that this is something that can work, and that they're willing to kind of trust and experiment and see where the process takes them, and then scale it based on the success that you have with those initial 10 to roll out to folks that might be more skeptical.
Exactly. And then you can take those internal stakeholders, those internal case studies, and really share them with the wider business. Because it's not just, successful ROI, return on relationships, we call it. It's not just about the external stakeholders and suppliers. There's a big drive on internal stakeholders and making sure you've got the wider business involved as well.
And when you get to this stage and you start thinking about who to involve in it, and you start reaching out to suppliers, I think when you start, you have to have in mind what success looks like. So I'm interested to know how you determine what success looks like in a relationship of this kind, or if there's any particular metrics that you use to demonstrate success.
Yeah, so the first line that we always start with is a proper joint account plan. Isn't just about two individuals, it's about both sides and all the individuals on both sides coming together and really defining what is needed for a successful relationship. So a big part of that is defining what a successful relationship will look like in 6, 12, 18 months' time. And then we've got a sort of successful account management structure. And it's broken down into 5 different steps. And The first step is obviously, well, the pre-step is segmentation, the bit we've just spoken about. Then you move into step one, which is culture and mindset. So what do I mean by this? Culture and mindset is all about defining your values and principles. And then both these values and principles then must be supported by the right behaviors. And I'm talking about some basic stuff here. You have a checklist of what these behaviors are and what these principles are and what the values are. And it's not just you as a buyer, you're sitting down and doing this with a supplier.
How does a supplier react to that? Because a lot of suppliers will probably think, here we go again, you've told me this before, and there was no discernible change in the way that you operated. So how do you get the trust with suppliers that this is different?
I think it's picking the initial suppliers, making sure we got the right ones, to our point earlier. And I think it's making sure that this is something that you both signed off on. It's not just, hey, look, guys, this is how we're going to act. This is actually the supplier putting input on. And it's about agreeing these terms, and if ever the line's being overcrossed or negotiations going the wrong way, it's all about returning to these principles, and really defining to the supplier that, we're putting resources, we're putting time against it, and this is where we want to go.
What level of, is this a buyer in the thought of a commodity manager or a sourcing specialist or sourcing consultant level of conversation, or are you bringing in the CPO or VP of sourcing or VP of supplier management or something like that to have these conversations to show that they're fully backed by the full power of the organization, if you will?
Yeah, so when we go in, and I can just talk from our stance as a technology business, when we go in and implement Vizibl, we bring in the wider stakeholders. So we want this to come from the CPO. It's really important that suppliers see that this is an initiative and a drive from procurement, not just some small side project that's being kicked off. Like with anything, this will then filter down within the business. We're looking to empower both sides, individuals. So while we talk about all this kind of stuff, the reason SRM, as I was saying earlier, wasn't successful in the past is because it was only really picking off the process side. What we're doing with some of this stuff here is really setting the mindset, then bringing the process, and then I'm biased. I would say then you need the technology. Technology is the key to get to scalable return on relationships. You can do this process with 2, 3, maybe 5 suppliers. But if you really want to scale this out and make it a successful program, then you need the technology around it that, gives you the visibility and the consistency and all the workflows and the productivity and so on and so forth.
So you discussed culture and mindset. What's the next thing that you look at from a plan perspective, an account management plan? Yeah,
so the next part would be the shared vision. And it sort of kicks on from what we were talking about before. So align on jointly agreed strategic objectives that really drive partnership focus. So that's having a shared vision, it's having a statement of intent, it's deciding what the commitments from both sides of the partnership are. And if that goes back to your question earlier, if you're showing what you're committing to the partnership, then the suppliers start to sort of open themselves up a little bit because they can see that your commitment. At the end of the day, all this is for it to be successful, it's about building trust, and it's about really putting in the commitment, the time, the resources, and the tools. So after stage 2, which is the shared vision, you then move into the step 3, which is about governance and sponsorship. So again, it's that commitment from all associates involved and ensure the allocation of resources. So the big problem, again, SRM, why we believe it's never worked before, is the lack of allocation of resources. It's all well and good, we're going to do SRM, but if the people leading this don't have the right people, you don't have the resourcing and the technology around it, you're going to fall flat on your face, because it is a commitment. It's not just a drop in the pan idea that, it hasn't worked in 6 months, let's just forget about it and move on to something new.
Yeah, and governance is a biggie. I really a big advocate of governance, probably from my service provider background. But it's not what you may think of governance as being tactical or day-to-day operations. Sure, that has a role, but I'm guessing you're thinking more high-level strategic, making sure you have the right people at the table and they're kind of looking at it from a higher level perspective than managing day-to-day stuff.
Yeah, so exactly, and it's broken in. Well, it moves all the way down. So you're talking about the governance structure and roles. So that's just a much higher level. Then it's obviously making sure that you've got continuity around your resources, and then it's really understanding what the issue resolution process is.
Yeah.
So if there's an issue lower down or higher up, depending on where you are in the food chain, making sure that you've got a good process in place to make sure that issues don't become problems, which in turn affect the relationship.
Yeah, and that you have the right level of people who actually are actively engaged in the governance process, so that it's not... you can have a governance process and then you don't have the right people who are actually interested in it, and it just becomes tactical.
Yeah, exactly. Moving away from that tactical approach.
Yeah.
I hate that word.
Yeah.
That, as the team have wanted me to drop in, that word is not the bang bang. We have a word internally here where
right.
if I think something's incredible or we've done something amazing, I'm like, guys, that is the bang bang.
Right.
None of them really get it, but it's fine.
That's a $5 into the jar then for being able to use that word in a context.
It is. That's your chosen charity.
Yep.
If once you move from governance and sponsorship, we move into performance management. And I've got a really good white paper actually on this. So again, another piece we'd love to share with your guys.
Yeah, and actually, just to jump in, I will link up to that afterwards. So send me the details, and I'd be happy to link to it in the show notes.
Okay, fantastic. Supplier performance management, we have named it 3D performance management. We've got a whole framework which I won't go into detail now, but in short, it's that at the moment we look at very much operational performance, which is the past. So if you think about when you look at your supplier, you look at its past performance, not actually the other parts of performance. So we think there's 3 dimensions. It's past, which is operational. There's present, which is relational. So what's going on exactly now? How can we look at that performance and make decisions and really run with it? And then it's the future, which is transformational. So with setting out some of these key aspects and governance structures and shared vision, how can we really look to the future of performance management and be improving it over a period of time? But
and so the intent is that those are both agreed to between both yourself and your supplier, so that you both basically investing in the same outcomes, the same outputs.
Exactly. It's amazing how often that a supplier doesn't know that they're performing badly before it's sort of not too late, but there's an issue. One of the things we try and push with our technology is allowing suppliers to see their performance that minute, that second, that day. So it's live. Everything on the platform is live, and we believe that we've got all this information. There is a huge amount of data sitting between all these businesses, but at the moment it sits in ERP systems where people don't really know how to make head or tail with it until they drag it down into an Excel spreadsheet. And by the time that Excel spreadsheet is quantified, it's already 2 weeks old and late. So it's
if you're lucky.
Yeah, if you're lucky. So it's about working together with your supplier. If they know that they're not performing in a certain area, and you let them know about it, or you work with them to improve it, then they're gonna leap at the opportunity to change that. And again, it just keeps coming back to, and I hope I'm not being basic, but it keeps coming back to that whole communication, alignment, and collaboration. Those are the real core areas of making this a success. If it's like anything. If you're married, the more you communicate, the more you align to doing activities together, and the more you collaborate, the easier it's going to be.
Well, it sounds simple, but it's one of those things that we lose sight of, because just day-to-day stuff gets in the way, and you come into work in the morning and there's another 5 fires to put out. So, it's often the basics that have the biggest impact, but we just forget about them because today they don't matter. But 3 months from now, it matters that I didn't do them. No,
exactly. And you're exactly spot on. And I think there's another big piece, and I've got a few articles on some of the things I've mentioned today, so I'll make sure I dig them up. But it's individuals, or KPIs of a procurement person are still very much around a cost focus, of a category manager, or and until those KPIs are changed, someone's not going to be bothered about driving innovation because they're not getting rewarded for it. So, why should I change what I'm doing when I've got 101, as you say, 101 things to do?
Right.
So it needs to come from the business as well as the head of procurement, that procurement's got to take a new direction and really become value. But But until you can show the ROI on those values, which is what we hope to do with return on relationships, it's going to be very difficult to get procurement to change their tact. And then the fifth step is transformation management, which is clarifying the way the value is recognized, so back to those value chips, by both parties, and then how this value gets shared. Businesses have got to understand that if you're getting joint innovation and you as a buyer are saving money, then you might want to be sharing this with your suppliers as you go forwards. And this goes back to the value chips, and then it also allows businesses to get into that innovation playground. Once all these processes and parts are put in place, innovation becomes the final output, so to speak.
Yeah, and we talked before we started recording a little bit about innovation, in that it's not something that you can put all this in place for and then 3 months down the line expect that all your suppliers are begging at your door for them to take all their valuable IP. So it needs a lot longer kind of investment of both energy and time, I think, before you get to that point.
Yeah, you're spot on. Innovation isn't something that's just grows on your doorstep in a week. It's a long-term, future-driven approach. It's something that businesses need to work on and work together on, but the rewards in time are massive.
And you discussed alignment earlier, an alignment between yourself as the buyer and your supplier. But I'm guessing that alignment in terms of the organizational goals and business performance is a huge driver of what you should be doing as a procurement organization, what you should be bringing and trying to get from the supplier relationship is making sure you're aligned with the business. Is that what you're seeing, or do folks often do this in a bubble?
So it's interesting. It's tends to start as procurement doing their piece, but as we're starting to see the returns and the rewards, and procurement, a part of what we want to do is help procurement tell that story internally and get other business functions to see that, hey, look, we're not just about cost focus now. We want to help you get the resourcing or get the marketing or use the agency you want to use, but let's go about it in collaborative fashion. So you're seeing the wider business really start to recognize that. And for us, and not talking about our technology, but technology can really help enable that. It allows for procurement to become better connected to the other parts of the business. So for an example, one of the areas we're working with is obviously marketing, and agencies are a massive part of this. And it's how you bring all those stakeholders from all different sides of the business, including, to drive the relationship, and basically both sides get what they want, which is an account that's delivering.
And it's interesting you mentioned marketing, because that's often one of the most, an agency specifically, one of the holy grails of trying to get engagement from procurement, and often somewhere we fall flat because they just don't understand what our traditional value prop has been. How do stakeholders in that space react when they start to go through a process like this? Do they realize that we're here as a partner and that we're not here to threaten their decision making, if you will?
Yeah, it's what the pretext is. It's very important to lay out to them, hey, look, guys, we're not just here to rain on your parade and stamp on your marketing spend as we've always done. It's about showing them, if you work collaboratively with your agencies and you bring us into the conversations earlier, then we can actually move forwards and really drive value from this, rather than you coming to us at the final hour and us saying no.
Right. And that's what's given us the bad reputation in the first place.
Yeah, that's why we're procurement's hated.
Right,
we're the cost killers.
Yeah, we tell everyone they can't do what they want, and it may be a message that somebody else wants to give them, but it's easier for procurement to be the messenger.
Exactly, but if we can work with them and understand their need, then we can understand, where it is that we've got to say no and drop the cost because it's not necessary, or where we can find a solution. Mm-hmm. And hence the sort of entrepreneurs or spend entrepreneurs, depending on how you want to call it.
So we're running up against time now, and I just have a last question that I'm interested in asking, and this is for at a more operational level. If you have somebody who's listening who just has a difficult relationship with a supplier they want to be more collaborative with, It can be somebody that's just really critical to their performance, for example. And the supplier might be a little bit more antagonistic or confrontational rather than being a partner.
Mm-hmm.
What would you recommend? What are the first couple of things they can do in attempting to start to turn the relationship around, bring more of a spirit of collaboration to that relationship?
Ask them for a round of golf. I'm joking.
Yep.
The where I would start with that is you've got to say to your suppliers, where can we improve? What are we doing wrong?
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, that question, if you're asking someone, we're not perfect, but where is it that I can improve? And if you can tick off just one of those areas, then I think that shows commitment to the supplier, to the relationship, and it also shows commitment that you care about how you're managing them and how you're going about working with them. And if they see you then making an effort to try and improve that or change it, then it drops the guard straight away because you're doing something for them rather than the other way around.
So you're listening, and it's kind of baby steps.
It is, exactly. It's the first step, build up that trust.
Well, Alex, thank you so much for your time today. I think that the subject itself is critical to our future role of procurement and really underpins pretty much everything we talk about in how we want to move the profession forward. So I think that you're definitely onto a winner with the work that you're doing at Vizibl. Because this is just fundamental to our growth as a profession and to be seen differently.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer of it, that I think if procurement doesn't change and go towards this value focus, it is going to shrink as a function, and it will lose its seat at the top table if it's not already. And so, we need to take note, and business needs to start working out other ways, and value focus and driving value to the business is obviously a key part of that.
So if listeners would like to reach out and learn a little bit more both about yourself and about Vizibl, what's the best place that they can find you?
Firstly, please do. Always love to hear people's thoughts or critique what I've said or challenge me or anything of the above and below. But the best place is probably check out our blog, which is blog.vizibl.co. Where a lot of this content sits, and we've got a number of white papers on there as well, which I'll share with you for the notes after this. Then the other place is Twitter, and of course LinkedIn. So full name is Alexander Short. Twitter account is AC_Shorty. And if you want to hit me directly, then my email is alex@oldstreetlabs.com.
Awesome. Well, what I'll do is I'll link up to your contact details in the show notes, and also some of the white papers and articles that we referenced today. I'll also link them up there. So if anybody's interested in learning a little bit more, they can just go to artofprocurement.com/collaboration. That's artofprocurement.com/collaboration. And now you've given out your email address, you might get a barrage of Bradford fans reaching out to you. All right. Well, I appreciate your graciousness on me continuing to tease you about that. But no, thanks a lot for your time, Alex. And thanks for being on the show.
Loved it. Thanks very much. Take care, guys.
Thanks. Bye.